They left her and her twin babies to die in the burning desert just to steal her late husband's wealth. But the desert did not take them. It made them stronger. 6 months of survival turned into years of hidden power. And now the mother and her daughters have returned not as victims, but as rulers, with vengeance in their hands. What happens when betrayal meets justice? Watch this story till the end, and don't forget to like, share, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to this channel for more. The sun had barely begun its descent behind the jagged horizon when Naomi stood in the courtyard of her late husband's mansion, her hands trembling as she clutched the tiny fingers of her newborn twins. Amara and Amaka, so delicate, so innocent, slept fitfully in her arms, their soft breaths rising and falling like whispers of hope in a world that had suddenly turned merciless. She was alone. The echoes of laughter and chatter that had once filled the mansion were gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on her like a heavy shroud. Chief Ozoemena, her husband, the man whose gentle strength had been the anchor of her life, was no more. A fever, swift and merciless, had taken him from the world, leaving Naomi to navigate a treacherous sea of grief and despair, holding not only her broken heart, but the fragile lives of the 2 children who now depended entirely on her. At first, she had thought she would find solace in her family, in the people who had birthed her, who had raised her under the same sun that now cast long, melancholy shadows over the courtyard. But hope died as quickly as it had been imagined. Naomi's father, Obiagwu, a tall, gaunt man with sharp features and eyes that seemed always to be calculating, watched her with an expression that made her stomach twist in unease. It was not grief she saw reflected in his gaze. It was greed, a hunger so raw and consuming it made the blood in her veins run cold. Her mother, Ngozi, plump and adorned in vibrant wrappers and heavy beads, followed silently, her eyes downcast, concealing a dangerous complicity. Her brothers, Obiora and Ifeanyi, tall and broad-shouldered men who had once been the pride of their family, now carried themselves with a dangerous arrogance, their smiles hollow and predatory. It was Obiagwu who broke the fragile silence first. His voice, cold and precise, cut through Naomi's sorrow like a knife. "Naomi," he said, his tone smooth, measured, "you know what must be done. The estates, the lands, the wealth that Ozoemena left behind, do you really expect that all this will belong to you? Or worse, to these children?" His eyes flicked to Amara and Amaka, their tiny heads resting against Naomi's chest, and for a moment Naomi felt a spark of defiance. "I do not care for wealth," she whispered, her voice trembling. "All I want is to raise my children in peace. I want to honor Ozoemena's memory." Obiagwu's lips curled into a smile devoid of warmth. "Peace? Honor? Naomi, do not be foolish. Peace and honor do not feed mouths, do not build houses, and certainly do not multiply fortunes. You must understand, there are sacrifices that must be made." Naomi's heart faltered. Something deep in her chest warned her that those she had trusted most were no longer her allies. Her mother shifted uneasily, avoiding her gaze, while her brothers remained silent, their expressions unreadable but tense. She could feel the air around her thicken with the weight of unspeakable intentions. That night, under the full moon that hung high and white in the sky, bathing the courtyard in an eerie silver light, Naomi's worst fears came true. She had just placed Amara and Amaka in their small cradle, hoping for a few hours of rest, when the sounds began. Heavy footsteps on the veranda, the rustle of cloth, the cold whisper of wind that seemed almost sentient in its urgency. Before she could react, strong hands seized her arms. She screamed, a raw, desperate sound that echoed across the empty courtyard. "Naomi, stop crying!" Obiagwu's hiss carried the venom of 1,000 betrayals. "Your tears will water the sand. Your blood will enrich our land." She struggled, kicking, clutching at her children, but the hands of her own family were relentless. Obiora and Ifeanyi each took one of the twins, their grip cruel yet controlled, as if the small infants were nothing more than fragile dolls. Naomi's cries grew louder, pleading, bargaining with the gods, with her family, with the world itself. "Please, please, you cannot do this. These are my children. My life is theirs." Ngozi, her mother, stepped forward, her eyes cold and resolute. "It must be done," she said softly, as though saying it gently would absolve her of guilt. "Do not resist, Naomi. We are only ensuring the future of the family." Naomi's chest heaved, her mind a whirlwind of disbelief and fury. "Future? You call this a future? This is murder!" Obiagwu's hand tightened around her wrist, dragging her toward the threshold of the desert that began just beyond the edges of the estate. The sand stretched endlessly, pale and unforgiving, reflecting the moonlight in a blinding shimmer. Each step she took was a struggle, every ounce of her strength used to resist the pull of her father's hand. Her babies whimpered, tiny cries that pierced her heart, each sound igniting a fire of determination within her. As they reached the first dunes, the harsh wind whipped across their faces, carrying with it the dry, suffocating scent of sand and despair. Naomi fell to her knees, pressing herself against the children, her hair whipping around her face, her tears fallen freely onto the unyielding ground. "Do not do this," she begged once more, her voice breaking. "I am your daughter. I am your sister. Do not cast us into the desert." Obiagwu's eyes, glinting with ruthless certainty, met hers. "It is done," he said simply, and with a shove, he and his accomplices left her there, standing alone in the vast, silent expanse of the desert, her hands clutching her children as the cold night enveloped them like a shroud. For a long time, Naomi remained frozen, rocking back and forth, whispering soft prayers to the gods, to the spirits of her ancestors, to the memory of her husband. The twins stirred, their tiny bodies pressing against hers, offering warmth and life in the face of relentless death. The desert around them was a grave waiting to claim their lives, a vast emptiness that promised nothing but hunger, thirst, and the merciless sun that would rise in a few hours. But as the first pale stars began to glimmer above, Naomi's despair slowly hardened into resolve. She looked down at Amara and Amaka, their small, fragile hands curling around hers, and she felt a fire ignite in her chest, a fire that no desert, no betrayal, no cruelty could extinguish. "If we survive," she whispered, her voice steady despite the trembling of her lips, "then one day, vengeance will be ours. The blood they have spilled will return to them tenfold." Hours turned into days, and the desert revealed itself in all its cruelty. Naomi scavenged what little she could find, drinking sparingly from puddles hidden among the dunes, shielding her children from the biting winds that sliced across the sand like knives. Hunger gnawed at her. Fatigue threatened to crush her spirit, yet she pressed on, driven by the fragile hope that they would live, that Amara and Amaka would grow, that they would one day see justice. She often thought of her family, and in those thoughts she found both rage and clarity. Her father, with his cold, calculating gaze, who had betrayed not only her but the memory of her husband. Her mother, who had abandoned the very flesh of her own daughter for the promise of wealth. Her brothers, strong and capable men, yet willing to leave helpless infants to die for their greed. These betrayals were wounds that would never heal, but they also became the source of her unyielding strength. At night, when the desert winds howled and the children slept fitfully, Naomi would whisper to them stories of courage, of survival, of the fierce women who came before them. Amara, Amaka, she would say softly, one day you will know what it means to fight for yourself. One day you will understand why your mother never gave up, and one day justice will be yours. Though she was alone, though the world seemed to have abandoned them, Naomi felt a presence in the shifting sands, a silent guardian that watched over them. She did not yet know it, but the desert itself had chosen to protect them, to offer its harsh resources as tools for survival. And as she looked up at the full moon, glowing high and unwavering in the sky, she made a silent vow. No matter how long it took, no matter the suffering, no matter the odds, she and her children would endure. The desert, wide and unforgiving, was now their home. But it was not just a place of death. It would become a crucible in which Naomi's courage, her resourcefulness, and her love for Amara and Amaka would be tested and tempered. The betrayal of blood would not be the end of their story. It would be the beginning of a journey that would transform them from helpless victims into forces of reckoning. And as the wind whispered across the dunes, carrying with it the scent of sand, freedom, and the promise of survival, Naomi pressed her children closer, her lips moving in a quiet, defiant prayer. Live, my daughters, survive, and remember this night, for it is the night the desert bore witness to the strength of a mother who would never surrender. The desert stretches endlessly, a vast sea of sand that glimmers under the sun by day and glows silver beneath the moon at night. To most, it is barren, merciless, a place where life is swallowed in silence. To Naomi, it had become a prison, a battlefield, and paradoxically, a cradle. For 6 months, she, Amara, and Amaka lived in that harsh expanse, clinging to life with a tenacity that defied logic, hope, and nature itself. The first week had been the hardest. Hunger gnawed at Naomi's belly, making her dizzy and weak. Her skin, once soft and pampered, had become leathery from the relentless sun. Her lips cracked and bled, and her eyes were perpetually bloodshot. Yet she never let her despair show fully to the twins. She wrapped Amara and Amaka close to her chest, pressing them against the warmth of her body to shield them from the bitter desert nights. She whispered constantly, her words fragments of comfort and promises. We will survive. We must survive. You are the light of my life, my children. Do not fear. The desert, however, was not as lifeless as it seemed. On the 5th night, as Naomi drifted between sleep and consciousness, she noticed a shadow moving gracefully among the dunes. At first, she thought it was a trick of her exhaustion, a mirage born of hunger and dehydration. But the figure emerged clearly, a desert fox, its golden fur shimmering under the moonlight, eyes glowing with an intelligence that seemed almost human. Naomi froze, her heart pounding in disbelief. The fox approached cautiously, then, to her astonishment, dropped a small cluster of desert fruits beside the infants. Naomi reached out hesitantly and saw gourds of water and roots she had never known could sustain life in such a place. The fox watched her, its gaze steady, almost approving, before retreating into the shadows. She fell to her knees, tears mingling with the dry sand beneath her. "Ozoamena?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Is this your spirit? Are you sending this creature to guide us?" Amara stirred in her arms, and Amaka cooed softly, and Naomi felt a spark of hope ignite where despair had taken root. That night, the fox became their silent guardian, appearing periodically to leave nourishment, guiding Naomi towards small desert springs, teaching her without words how to find food, how to survive. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Naomi learned the rhythm of the desert, the way the wind shifted sand to reveal hidden water, the burrows where desert rodents stored seeds, and the occasional flowering cactus whose fruit, bitter though it was, could sustain life. Each day was a struggle, a battle with nature and exhaustion, yet she persisted, driven by the tiny, fragile lives that rested against her chest. Amara and Amaka grew stronger by the day. Their skin took on a healthy glow despite the harsh sun, and their cries became fewer as Naomi learned to soothe them with subtle movements, soft humming, and the constant rhythm of her heartbeat. Naomi herself transformed. Her body, once soft from years of comfort, became lean and muscular, hardened by the labor of survival. Her hands bore blisters and calluses from digging for roots and crafting crude shelters from driftwood and scraps of cloth she had managed to carry. Her hair, once perfectly braided and adorned, became tangled and matted, yet somehow, in the harshness of the desert, it gave her an aura of resilience, an unspoken warning that she would not yield. Her eyes, once soft and trusting, hardened with the steel of someone who had faced death and stared it in the face, refusing to blink. The desert became their teacher, their tormentor, and ultimately their home. It was both grave and cradle. Naomi would often lie awake at night, staring at the blanket of stars overhead, feeling the weight of her isolation pressing down, yet also sensing an unspoken bond forming between her and the land. She whispered to Amara and Amaka about courage, about survival, about the vengeance that one day would be theirs. "My daughters," she said one night, as the desert wind howled around them, "this land may try to take us, but it will also make us strong. Every grain of sand beneath our feet carries the story of survival, and one day you will use this strength to reclaim what was stolen from us." One particularly harsh day, the twins fell ill. A fever struck them suddenly, leaving Naomi in a panic. She wrapped them in whatever cloth she could find, rocking them against her chest, whispering prayers and promises. She remembered the desert fox and ventured further than she had dared before, seeking the hidden spring it had shown her weeks prior. Hours passed, and the sun hung mercilessly in the sky, but Naomi did not falter. When she finally reached the spring, she used her hands to scoop water, washing the girls' faces and lips, murmuring encouragement. Slowly, with the help of the nourishing fruits and roots the fox left behind, their fevers subsided. It was during these months that Naomi learned to see the desert as a living entity. The scorching days tested her patience, the freezing nights her resolve, yet the desert also gave her moments of grace. When the twins giggled for the first time at a fluttering lizard or a shimmering grain of sand, Naomi laughed too, a sound so rare and bright that even the desert seemed to pause in recognition. And always the fox was there, a guardian, a silent reminder that she was not entirely alone, that the spirits of the past watched over them, The months dragged on, each day a cycle of hardship and minor victories. Naomi learned to hunt small game, using traps fashioned from twigs and stones, to collect dew from the leaves of desert plants, to make crude shelters from whatever the desert provided. She spoke to the twins constantly, narrating stories of heroes and warriors, of women who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. "Amara, Amaka," she would whisper, "you will grow strong, you will grow clever, and one day the world will remember your names." Then one day salvation came in the form of people, a caravan of nomadic traders weathered by the desert, their camels laden with goods and spices, their eyes sharp and discerning. Naomi spotted them on the horizon, a thin line against the endless dunes. Heart-pounding, she approached cautiously, cradling the twins against her chest. The traders were stunned, their faces a mix of disbelief and awe as they took in Naomi's gaunt frame, her weathered skin, her intense eyes, and the thriving, laughing twins in her arms. "By the gods," one of them whispered, "they should not be alive." "They could not have survived here." Naomi did not reply immediately. She only nodded, her gaze steady, refusing to cry, refusing to beg. She had survived too long to beg now. The traders, sensing both her strength and the gravity of her ordeal, offered to take them away, to hide them in a distant region where no one from her family could ever find them. Naomi agreed, her heart heavy but resolute. She packed what little belongings she had, wrapping the twins in cloth, and followed the caravan as it slowly moved away from the land that had tried to destroy them. Before leaving the desert, Naomi knelt in the sand, letting the wind whip her hair across her face. She traced her fingers through the dunes, leaving a message only the wind could carry. "This land that was meant to kill us will one day bear witness when we return to kill them." Her voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a promise, a vow etched into the soul of the desert itself. As they disappeared into the distance, the desert stretched endlessly behind them, silent and vast, as if acknowledging the survival of Naomi and her daughters. The wind seemed to carry a faint echo of a growl, not of a beast, but of the fox, the guardian who had watched over them, as if approving the fulfillment of a small miracle. Naomi looked down at Amara and Amaka, their eyes wide with curiosity and innocence, untainted by the cruelty of the world. She kissed their foreheads gently, feeling the warmth of life and the power of resilience. "You are mine, and you are strong," she whispered. "The world tried to break us, but we endured. And one day the people who abandoned us will know that we have not forgotten." The journey away from the desert was long and arduous. Naomi kept her children close, sharing stories, singing lullabies, and teaching them lessons of survival, cunning, and patience. She was determined to raise them not only alive, but capable, preparing them for the day when they would understand the depth of the injustice that had been done to them and the strength that they had inherited through suffering. By the time they reached the distant oasis where the traders offered them refuge, Naomi's body bore the marks of the desert's cruelty: sunburned skin, calloused hands, and hair matted with sand. Yet in her eyes burned a fierce light, a fire that would never be extinguished. The twins, laughing and healthy, clung to her as if sensing that she had been both their shield and their sword. In this new land, Naomi vowed, she and her daughters would not only survive, they would thrive. The desert had taught her the most important lesson: life could be stolen, but the spirit could never be defeated. And as she held Amara and Amaka close, she silently promised that the vengeance that had been whispered into the sand, carried by the wind, and observed by the mystical guardian of the dunes, would one day be fulfilled. For now they had been rescued, hidden from the reach of their treacherous family. But Naomi knew that survival was only the first step. The desert had forged them, tempered their bodies and spirits, and when the time came, they would rise, not as victims, but as forces of reckoning, bound by blood, fire, and the unbreakable will of a mother who refused to surrender. And so, the children of the desert began a new chapter, shielded by kindness, strengthened by struggle, and fueled by the promise of vengeance that lingered like a shadow over every step they took. The desert had not claimed them. It had made them immortal in spirit, ready for the storm that would one day return to claim those who had tried to bury them alive. Years had passed since Naomi, Amara, and Amaka left the desert behind. Time had molded them in ways the harsh sands of their childhood could only begin to hint at. The girls had grown into young women, striking and formidable, each bearing the unmistakable aura of resilience carved from suffering. Amara, taller and commanding, carried herself with an elegance that spoke of both intelligence and an unwavering will. Her eyes, a deep chocolate brown, seemed to pierce the hearts of those who dared underestimate her, betraying the fire within her soul. Amaka, slightly smaller in stature but no less fierce, had a softer appearance, her dimples a deceptive lure, hiding the razor-sharp mind she had honed in secrecy. Together they were known in whispers as the Desert Sisters, an enigmatic pair whose influence and wealth had grown quietly, yet whose presence demanded attention wherever they walked. Naomi had dedicated herself entirely to shaping her daughters, not merely to survive the world, but to conquer it. The years in the desert had been brutal, but they had taught her the art of patience, the necessity of strategy, and the power of discretion. Every lesson she had learned, every trial she had endured, became a tool she wielded with precision in raising her daughters. She instructed them in trade, in diplomacy, in reading the intentions behind smiles and gestures. Amara, Amaka, she would say, her voice calm yet resolute. Strength without wisdom is no better than a sword in the hands of a child. Learn when to strike, learn when to wait, and never forget what it feels like to be powerless. Let that memory guide your hand. The twins soaked up her teachings with a hunger that mirrored Naomi's own unrelenting determination. They practiced negotiation, crafting deals in secret markets that allowed them to amass wealth without drawing attention. Their mother guided them through the intricacies of commerce, teaching them how to invest, how to protect assets, and how to move undetected through networks that would otherwise seek to exploit them. By their early 20s, the girls were not only fluent in trade, but also adept in the subtleties of human behavior. They could read a man's intentions as easily as one might read a letter, a skill honed through years of listening, observing, and learning from Naomi's quiet lessons in the shadows. The city they had chosen as their refuge became the backdrop for their transformation. Unlike the desert, with its emptiness and hostility, the city offered opportunity, connections, and anonymity. Naomi and her daughters navigated its bustling markets, its intricate networks of merchants and traders, and its hidden corners where deals were made in whispers. They amassed wealth slowly, deliberately, never drawing attention to themselves, yet leaving an indelible mark on every venture they touched. Merchants spoke of the desert sisters with a mix of awe and fear, rumors of their shrewdness spreading like wildfire, though no one knew the full extent of their power. Despite their growing influence, Naomi never allowed her daughters to lose sight of their origins, the raw lessons of survival in the desert, and the betrayal that had shaped their lives. She reminded them often, "Remember who you are. Remember what was taken from us. But remember, vengeance is a tool, not a mask for anger. Strike with purpose, not impulse. Justice is patient, but inevitable." It was during a quiet evening, as the three sat atop a terrace overlooking the city, that news reached them of the family they had left behind. A courier had come from the outskirts of Naomi's homeland, bearing a letter wrapped in crimson wax. Naomi broke the seal with hands that no longer trembled, reading the words aloud to her daughters. "Obiagwu and his sons have expanded their estates, taking lands that were once ours. They flaunt their wealth, oppressing the poor, seizing what is not theirs, and enforcing their rule through fear." Amara's eyes narrowed, the fire within her igniting at the injustice that had continued unchecked. She clenched her fists, her voice low and determined. "Mama, you raised us in shadows, but shadows do not last forever. It is time the sun exposed them. The world must see what they have done." Amaka, ever the strategist, leaned forward, her gaze calculating, eyes flicking to Naomi as if weighing the consequences of each action. "We cannot act recklessly," she said softly, her tone precise, deliberate. "They are powerful, and their wealth shields them from justice. We must be smart, methodical. Every move must be a step toward the reckoning they deserve." Naomi nodded, her face serene yet intense, the years of hardship written in the lines of her jaw and the depth of her eyes. "Yes, my daughters," she replied, "but revenge is not anger, it is justice. We will not act out of spite. We will act because the scales must be balanced. What was stolen from us, what was denied to us, will be restored, not with chaos but with purpose. Your father's spirit, your father's legacy, the integrity of what was ours, these are the foundations upon which we will rebuild." The daughters listened intently, absorbing every word. They understood that their mother's wisdom was as sharp as any weapon, and that patience, often underestimated, was the greatest advantage they had against the men who had once sought to destroy them. Their childhood in the desert had taught them resilience, but it was Naomi's guidance in the city that had honed their skills, turning raw survival into calculated power. Under Naomi's tutelage, Amara and Amaka excelled in commerce and influence. They established a network of trade routes and hidden warehouses, slowly consolidating wealth that rivaled the estates their family had usurped. Through subtle negotiation and alliances with merchants, bankers, and city officials, they created a web of influence that spread beyond the borders of their city of refuge. Few suspected the Desert Sisters held such power, but those who did tread carefully, aware that the sisters could make or break fortunes with a single decision. Yet even with wealth, intelligence, and influence, the desire for justice simmered quietly beneath the surface. Naomi never allowed the fire of vengeance to consume them prematurely. She instructed them in patience, in observation, and in the art of waiting for the perfect moment to act. "The desert taught us survival," she reminded them one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the city in shades of gold and crimson. "The city will teach us strategy. Together, they will prepare you for what is to come. Remember, Power is nothing without purpose, and justice is nothing without precision. Months turned into years, and the Desert Sisters' reputation grew. Stories of their generosity to the oppressed, their cleverness in business, and their uncompromising will spread quietly, often whispered among the people who had once suffered under the tyranny of Obiagwu and his sons. The twins became symbols of hope, shadowed in mystery, always seen but never fully known. They were the embodiment of their mother's teachings, carrying forward the legacy of survival, resilience, and the promise of retribution. Despite the passage of time, Naomi never let them forget the betrayal that had set their lives on this path. Every lesson, every story, every warning about greed, cruelty, and injustice was a thread woven into the tapestry of their upbringing. "Amara, Amaka," she said one evening, as they sat in the glow of lantern light, "do not let the world soften you. Remember the desert, remember your suffering, and remember the family who sought to bury you alive. Their names are etched in your history, and their reckoning will come through your wisdom and strength." Amara's gaze was steady, her mind already racing through strategies and possibilities. "Mama," she said, her voice firm yet controlled, "we are ready. We have waited, we have grown, we have learned. Now it is time for the world to see that we are not to be underestimated." Amaka, with her eyes reflecting the sharpness of her intellect and the depth of her patience, nodded in agreement. "Yes, we are ready, but we must strike carefully. Precision is our ally, and patience is our weapon. Justice, not anger, will be our path." Naomi smiled, a rare expression that carried both pride and the quiet satisfaction of a mother who had seen her children endure and triumph. "You understand, my daughters? The world will not give us what is ours. We must take it, not through blind fury, but through calculated action. Our time will come, and when it does, it will be unstoppable." In the years that followed, the Desert Sisters continued to build their empire in secret, consolidating wealth and influence while maintaining the appearance of ordinary young women. Naomi watched with quiet pride as Amara and Amaka blossomed into the leaders she had envisioned, each action measured, each decision deliberate, each move bringing them closer to the inevitable day when they would reclaim what had been stolen from them. Word of their growing power eventually reached the ears of Obiagwu and her brothers, though they dismissed it at first, confident in their wealth and the fear they commanded. But the seeds had been sown, and the Desert Sisters' influence had already begun to ripple outward, touching the very people that had suffered under their family's tyranny. The stage was set, the pieces were in motion, and Naomi knew that when the time came, her daughters would not falter. That night, as the city slept under a blanket of stars, Naomi gazed out over the streets where her daughters had quietly built their empire. She held her daughters close, their presence a reminder of how far they had come. "Amara, Amaka," she whispered softly, "remember this moment. Remember the patience, the resilience, and the strength that brought you here. The day will come when we reclaim our legacy, but it must be done with purpose. Justice is coming, and we will be ready." The Desert Sisters, under Naomi's guidance, had risen from the ashes of the desert, transformed from victims into masters of strategy, wealth, and influence. They were no longer the helpless children abandoned to the merciless sands. They were formidable, intelligent, and ready to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The world had not yet seen the power they wielded. But when the sun finally rose on the day of reckoning, nothing would remain the same. The ancestral village of Naomi's family had changed little in the years she had been away, yet to her eyes everything seemed smaller, smaller, and petty, compared to the breadth of power and wisdom she now carried. The streets were bustling with villagers preparing for the annual harvest festival, unaware that this year the festival would bear witness to an upheaval unlike any the village had ever seen. Naomi, once a grieving widow abandoned by blood, now walked with the calm authority of a queen. Her braided hair was adorned with silver threads and delicate golden ornaments, flowing over a regal wrapper of deep burgundy and gold. Her presence alone demanded attention. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to see not just the present, but the hidden intentions of every soul she passed. Behind her, Amara and Amaka followed, their steps measured, their golden attire shimmering like sunlight on sand. The twins carried themselves with a quiet, irresistible power. Amara's tall, commanding figure drew gasps from villagers as she moved, the piercing brown of her eyes warning of strength and judgment. Amaka, with her soft smile and calculating eyes, exuded quiet intelligence, a mind capable of unraveling deception and laying bare the motives of any who dared oppose her. They were flanked by guards, men loyal only to them, yet their presence was almost symbolic. Even without the men, the sisters radiated an aura of authority that made the villagers instinctively step aside. As Naomi and her daughters approached the village square, a hush fell over the festival. Vendors paused, children stopped their play, and elders whispered to one another, confusion etched into their faces. Word had already spread through subtle channels. The Desert Sisters had returned, and Naomi, thought to be dead, vanished in the desert years ago, was here, alive, formidable, unbowed. At the center of the square, surrounded by ornate stalls and laughing villagers, stood Obiagwu, his sons Obiora and Ifeanyi, and Ngozi. They were dressed in their finest robes, flaunting the wealth they had accumulated over the years, oblivious to the storm approaching them. Obiagwu, tall and imposing in stature, carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he had escaped the consequences of his sins. His eyes, however, flickered nervously as Naomi stepped into view. The villagers' murmurs grew louder as recognition dawned. "Is that Naomi?" one whispered. "The woman they left to die in the desert?" Naomi raised her head, her voice carrying across the square with the weight of command. "Yes," she said clearly, her tone steady. "It is I. I am alive. And I have returned with witnesses of your greed, your cruelty, and your betrayal." Obiagwu's face paled, the arrogance draining from his eyes. This is impossible," he stammered. "She cannot... How?" Amara stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority, addressing the crowd first and then her family. "You left a mother and her children to die, believing the desert would claim us and your power would remain unchallenged. But the desert did not claim us. It made us strong. It made us unstoppable. Today, the truth will be seen and justice will be delivered." Amaka followed, holding a stack of documents, maps, and letters, the evidence Naomi and the twins had gathered over years in secret. "These," she said, letting her voice rise so that every villager could hear, "are records of the estates you stole, the lands you seized, and the oppression you inflicted on those weaker than you. You were celebrated by some as powerful, but your deeds were crimes, and crimes must be seen for what they are." A hush fell over the square as villagers leaned forward to catch every word. One by one, witnesses, farmers who had lost land, merchants who had been cheated, women who had been humiliated, stepped forward, confirming the twins' words. Every account chipped away at the veneer of respectability that Naomi's family had so carefully constructed. The whispers of admiration for Obiagwu and his sons were replaced with gasps of shock and murmurs of outrage. Amara, her voice sharp and commanding, gestured toward the vast lands and properties controlled by her uncles. All of this belongs to those who work it, not to those who steal it. Today, I claim it in the name of justice, for my mother, for myself, and for my sister. Every acre, every building, every asset will be restored to its rightful place, away from those who thought themselves untouchable. Amaka stepped forward, her demeanor calm but unyielding, and instructed the village scribes to record the confessions of Obiagwu, Obiora, and Ifeanyi. Then she ensured that the testimonies, the evidence, and the details of their crimes were broadcast throughout the surrounding villages, stripping them of any illusion of honor or authority. Word spread like wildfire. The Desert Sisters had returned, and the family that once wielded power through fear now faced public scrutiny and humiliation. Obiagwu, overcome with disbelief and fear, sank to his knees, his hands raised in a futile plea. "Naomi, please," he begged, his voice trembling. We can make amends. We were wrong. I did not know the desert would not take you." Ngozi collapsed to the ground, weeping openly, her beads clattering to the stone beneath her. She had counted on Naomi's death as a final assurance that their plan would succeed, yet here she was, standing tall and radiant, backed by the very daughters she had once attempted to abandon. Obiora and Ifeanyi, refusing to kneel, glared at the crowd, their fists clenched, ready to fight. But their threats fell on deaf ears. The villagers, emboldened by Naomi and her daughters, formed a wall between the family and any potential chaos. Fear and respect for the Desert Sisters had replaced the old intimidation tactics. For the first time, the men realized that their wealth and stature could not shield them from the consequences of their actions. The sisters moved with precision. Amara oversaw the formal seizure of all estates, lands, and wealth, ensuring that the redistribution was public and irreversible. Amaka, with meticulous care, ensured that every act of betrayal and oppression was recorded and transmitted, leaving no room for denial or escape. The family's reputation crumbled, the illusion of power shattered in front of the very people they had oppressed. As the last of the properties were handed over, the villagers closed in. Obiagwu, Obiora, and Ifeanyi were forced to face the reality of disgrace, dragged from their grand hall by those they had once subjugated. The hum of whispered anger rose into a chorus of triumph and vindication. Naomi, standing tall, watched as the men who had once left her to die were brought low, not by vengeance fueled with hatred, but by justice orchestrated with wisdom and strategy. Ngozi's weeping filled the air as she was led away, the beads slipping from her neck like tears of shame. The men tried to resist, but the villagers' unity, combined with the careful orchestration of Naomi and her daughters, left them powerless. The desert had taught them patience, resilience, and strategy, and now, in the heart of their ancestral village, those lessons bore their ultimate fruit. Naomi's eyes scanned the crowd, finally settling on a familiar figure at the edge of the square, the golden desert fox. Its fur glinted in the sunlight, its eyes gleaming with the same intelligence and vigilance Naomi had first witnessed in the desert months and years ago. She smiled faintly, whispering, her voice carrying the weight of memory and triumph. The desert never forgets. And so, the tale of Naomi, Amara, and Amaka closed one chapter and opened another, one in which survival had transformed into power, betrayal into justice, and the desert's unforgiving sands into a legacy that would echo for generations